Welcome to another video of the Vickers MG Collection and Research Association. Normally you have to put up with just me talking about machine guns. That's probably going to be the case, but at least I've got somebody with me this time. This is Matt Yates, who's one of the other directors of the association. Now, as a bit of background to Matt, he's been sort of part of the MMGs side of things for the association for a fair few years now.
Yeah, absolutely.
First came along to the Chiltern Open Air Museum event back in 2008.
Ooh,
So a long time ago.
Yeah.
When we did running around with
That's
Vickers.
maths I can't do.
Well, yeah, and don't try.
Yeah.
Because this will change every year when I put it back out. So Matt's interest is glider pilots and airborne forces, really. So given that this week is the week of the anniversary of Operation Market Garden, we wanted to do a video that is about that operation, but also a little bit about the wider airborne use of the Vickers machine gun in the Second World War. So the idea was to have that balance a little bit more, rather than just the machine gun heavy stuff that I did perhaps for the Operation Overlord video, and you'll probably see in some of the other videos that I did, because how machine guns get into action with airborne forces, how the Vickers machine gun gets into action with airborne forces, is a little bit different. And it's one of the things that Matt and I have explored in a little bit more detail, and then used at some of the displays that we've done at the likes of the Royal International Air Tattoo at Fairford and Bicester Heritage, where we've displayed the Horsa glider fuselage and how everything fits in it, haven't we?
Yeah, exactly. Which worked really well, didn't it?
Yeah.
I think as a way to describe it and illustrate it to the public, we couldn't have done it better.
No.
Unless we'd had a glider, which isn't going to happen.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
So that's probably, we'll touch on glider delivery of the Vickers machine gun, or the machine gun platoons, in a little bit more detail. But at the start of airborne forces, they didn't have the Vickers in their arsenal. And it's worth saying that parachute battalions and the airlanding battalions, so parachute battalions parachute in, and airlanding battalions go in by glider, and predominantly the Horsa glider. And so when airborne forces are first formed, the parachute battalions, the airlanding battalions don't have the medium machine gun. They've just got mortars as their heavy weapon, because they replicate the infantry battalions in infantry divisions that have the divisional machine gun battalions with their Vickers. Now, the Airborne Division doesn't have a divisional machine gun battalion. So
it's not because they're intended to be light infantry.
I don't think so.
Because they've got 3-inch mortars.
Yeah.
So that wouldn't...
Yeah.
So basically it's because they're mimicking the infantry battalions.
I think it's part
in their structure.
I think it's part of the doctrine.
So then they must have discovered...
Because they had 6-pounders.
Yeah, so they must have discovered pretty early on that they needed a Vickers machine gun, or they needed Vickers machine guns.
Yeah.
In a defensive role.
Yeah, so they had the MMG with the 1st Air Landing Reconnaissance Squadron to start with.
All right, yeah.
So we see it later on with them with their Vickers K guns, and there's a specific video on that. But we do then, there's a very sort of famous and well rolled out photo of 1st Air Landing Reconnaissance Squadron before it was 1st Airborne Reconnaissance Squadron at Netheravon. I think it's at Netheravon. It might be Old Sarum. I can't quite remember. But of it on the Jeep.
Yeah.
And those guys are all stood there in their normal Mark II helmets.
Yeah.
No airborne helmets. They're in battle dress. No denizens.
So very early then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they did have MMGs in that squadron, but the battalions, the main fighting element, didn't.
Right. Okay.
And one of the things that it seems, and we've got a sort of few crib books here. So Tunisian Tales has got a little bit about how that happens, because there is a photo, and I'll share it, of the Vickers in use in Tunisia in 1943, and you think, well, they shouldn't have it by that point. But there's a couple of comments in here that say, one's from Browning's diary, and he says, Vickers machine gun. There is a general demand throughout First Army for the reintroduction of the Vickers machine gun, and there is no doubt that this weapon would be extremely valuable in the Airborne Division, both for air landing and parachute troops. The problem is how and where to include it. So I think that reintroduction it's not that the Vickers has been disbanded at all. That's infantry battalions before the war had a machine gun platoon, a machine gun company in some cases, and actually then during the war they go to the divisional machine gun battalions, and the infantry battalions don't have them. So I think this reintroduction is reintroducing it to the infantry battalion. And then one of the standing orders for 2nd Parachute Battalion in defensive positions, 18th of February 1943, talks about, where is it? Battalion mortars and MMGs will sleep in battle positions with double sentries per detachment, where subunit positions are far apart. Intervening ground will be covered either by listening posts or periodic patrols. And you think, okay, so they're talking about the MMGs, they must have them. But looking through the war establishments, and it's quite sort of interesting to see that although they mention it there, the ammunition table that's accompanying those orders doesn't mention 303 ammunition for MMGs. So it's like, well, they have them, but perhaps they're informally acquired at that point. And the war establishments don't talk about Vickers medium machine guns or medium machine guns in general until 1944, when one of the 2 mortar platoons, 3-inch mortars, can be trained and re-rolled as a medium machine gun platoon at the battalion commander's discretion. And then it's not until I think it's 45 that actually a medium machine gun platoon is specifically mentioned for the parachute battalions. And I think that's the case for Airlanding, but we know that, you know, informally, or they did take the decision within 6th Airlanding Brigade to, I think they got their Vickers machine guns in April by re-rolling the light anti-aircraft platoons that existed. So 20mm, I think it was. So that's 6th Airlanding, Devons, Royal Ulster Rifles, and Oxon Bucks Light Infantry. So they get theirs in April 1944, and then, as we know, June 1944, they're expected to be using those in action.
So was just an interesting thing that we haven't discussed yet is, what about Sicily?
Sicily, so I don't know.
Right.
Be really, really honest about that. Yeah. I don't know. I'd have to look into that.
Because that's 1st Airborne, of course, isn't it?
Yeah,
so
1st Airborne. Yeah. Well, they're going straight from here, so you'd have to assume they had them.
Yeah.
Or certainly had access to them, using them. Lessons learned from Tunisia.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of any examples.
I can't think of where they were.
I can't think of any.
And it might be that the drops were so dispersed and stuff in Sicily that you'd lose track of them.
Yeah.
But yeah, it'd be interesting to find out.
If they've gone in by glider, they may very well have ended up in the sea.
Yeah.
So
there's a few options.
Something to look into.
So the MMGs, let's say, don't formally appear, but we know they existed for Overlord in June. We definitely know they existed for Market Garden. And I think they were in this position where you've got a machine gun platoon alongside a mortar platoon now, and there is sort of some account of the sort of MMG group was having 2 platoons in the Airlanding battalions. Yeah. So those guys are the South Staffs, the Border Regiment, and the King's Own Scottish Borderers, and they're definitely taking those in, and they're taking those in by Horsa glider. Yeah. And they've got a mix of handcart platoons and jeep-borne platoons. So we're sat in a jeep now, albeit in its infantry configuration at the moment, or a bit of a half model, because it's got quick release steering wheel and stuff. But so I think it was 1 platoon of each MMG group was a jeep-borne, and 1 platoon was handcart borne. So the push-along folding handcart.
What about your parachute battalions then?
So parachute
battalions, are they dropping with them?
Yeah, right. Yeah, they're dropping with them.
Okay.
So they are putting those into either individual loads or in containers that they're going down out of the planes.
Yeah, right.
Alongside, and then they're resupplying with panniers. So this is one of the resupply panniers that would have been full of 303 ammunition in liners. So they used the same liners for the Vickers, the same sort of pre-packed liners. They stripped them out of their wooden boxes potentially. There is some photos of them in the wooden boxes, but put into these liners to drop that resupply ammunition as well. So, Market Garden, they'd have gone in by Horsa. Yeah. I don't know if you want to say a bit more about the Horsa glider.
Well, obviously, the Horsa glider Mark 1 was used extensively at Arnhem, so that's a side-loading door. So you've got to try and get the jeeps up a ramp, round a corner, down the fuselage. Steering wheel comes off to go under the main spar, and then goes back on again on the other side. So you can drive it out of the tail. So the vehicles then would have carried the guns and in the trailers as well.
Yeah. So there's a little bit of footage of the guns being loaded in a trailer.
Right.
I think that might be 6th Airborne, but same principles apply.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So Horsa gliders used extensively by the Airlanding battalions and some of the parachute units as well that were carried in by glider, recce, people like that. But I can't think of what else to say about the gliders.
One of the things that we found in the...
Give me a prompt.
Yeah, what we found the loading diagrams.
That's right, many of them,
80 of them for Horsa, I think it was, 79 or 80. And
I think it's more. I think it's like 88.
Okay.
Different variations of loading.
Yeah, because I'm sure some.
And that includes bridging sections, bulldozers, river crossing boats, pontoon boats, all manner of things really. But different variations for just jeeps, different variations for troops. It just goes on and on.
So there's one for the Airlanding battalion. Well, there's a lot for the Airlanding battalion, but one of those is for the mortar platoon. There isn't one for the machine gun platoon. Yeah. So that reinforces the point that they shouldn't have had them. So it isn't, by the book, they were converting mortar platoons to them, and that showed a jeep, trailer, and a motorcycle. Yeah. And all the lashing diagrams and everything for that are in there. But it shows that one jeep would have one gun would have been the fighting unit for that, and a motorcycle. I don't think the machine gun platoon would have had 4 motorcycles, but it does give you. Well, it may have done. If it's converted straight from the mortars, it may well have done. But it does give you that extra bit of mobility for like the platoon sergeant. It means you can put a gun per jeep. And then, whereas an infantry platoon would have had carriers for the platoon sergeant, the platoon commander, put them on motorcycles and let them go round and do their interconnectivity and intercommunication work that way. So, the glider was certainly the main mode of delivery for the Airlanding battalions.
You've got to remember as well that they used, by this point, they'd learnt an awful lot from Sicily and from D-Day. So tactical loading was high up on the priorities for using the gliders. So that means not only are you making sure that you're landing your MMGs with your MMG trained troops on the same landing zone, but also you're keeping things apart. You're keeping your higher ranking officers separated and things like that, so they're not all coming in to the same landing zone. Yep. But it's an important thing to know. So your support companies will all be landing together. Yeah. Your anti-tank weaponry should be landing together with the trained crews that are going to use that as well. And we discussed yesterday as well about the glider pilots themselves.
Yeah. So Matt's specialism is glider pilots. So
the pilots of the glider pilot regiment operated differently to those in the United States Air Force. They were infantry trained, but pilots primarily. The British were army soldiers that had volunteered to join the regiment. They were then trained to fly, and then they were also retrained in battle schools. So they were known as total soldiers, and they were then trained to operate the loads that they carried. So they could operate the 75mm howitzer, they could operate the 6-pounder anti-tank gun, 3-inch mortars, and they went on training courses to be able to do that. What we've discovered is that there's no record of them being trained to operate the Vickers MMG. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. So the Glider Pilot Regiment Depot and the training centre, the war establishment for those has a 6-pounder listed, a 75mm. I think it might have a 17-pounder. Yeah. 2-inch mortar, 3-inch. They're all there listed, so that they get familiarisation with those weapons. But the Vickers is not. So I wonder if that's part of the problem of not formally allowing the Airlanding battalions to have Vickers. And maybe they acquired them, so it'd be interesting to know if anybody else sort of knows of any evidence of the glider pilots being trained on the MMGs. It's not as you'll see from the other videos we've done, it's not a naturally intuitive weapon to fire because you've got to cock it twice for a start. There's lots of things that go wrong, so it's actually quite a training burden to go through, whereas many of the other weapons have the same principles. The MMG does not. So that might be a reason.
Yeah, I think there's always the possibility that any particular pilot could have come from an infantry battalion where he had experience of operating a Vickers machine gun. But from what we can discover, there's no actual establishment for training them on that weapon, which is interesting. It's almost like a slow to catch up type scenario.
Possibly, yeah.
So they've introduced them to the Airlanding battalions and the parachute battalions, but the glider pilot regiment, which of course is independent to the two airborne divisions, 1st and 6th, then they're slow to catch up in that training regime on that particular weapon.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, it would be interesting to know. So that's sort of the glider delivery, and they did. There were a few losses that Ariane van Hees mentions in his books, Tugs and Gliders to Arnhem. So where the crew and the gun and everything didn't get there because the glider was lost for some reason, and the aircraft dropping parachutists as well. There was a very I'd say famous but a well-known loss of 156 Battalion of the Parachute Regiment. Half of their machine gun platoon was in one plane, Chalk 619, that just completely lost. So they lost 2 guns before they even got on the ground. So 156 Battalion was down by half of their allocation, half of their capability straight away. But I believe all the other parachute battalion MG platoons got to the dropping zones and landed safely. And then you can start to trace how those parachute battalions and air landing battalions move into Oosterbeek and Arnhem as part of Market Garden to and how the Vickers machine guns go with them. Worth saying that the other Vickers machine guns, I mentioned it earlier in the vid, of the 1st Air Landing, now the 1st Airborne Reconnaissance Squadron, they had Vickers K guns, and I've done a very specific vid on those. But they by this time they'd swapped from their water-cooled Vickers machine guns to the air-cooled Vickers K, Vickers gas-operated machine gun. And Reconnaissance Squadron is a video all of its own, or best left to other people, like Paul Woodadge on World War II TV, who's doing some of those videos at the moment. And so looking at how the air landing and the parachute battalions use the Vickers, then we can get into a little bit more detail about some of the photographs that we've seen of them and some of the accounts that exist for them. The first of which is probably the most well-known action, being the bridge itself. The bridge being the target of the whole operation, the Arnhem Road Bridge, and the house that's there was alongside the bridge and held the platoon of Vickers machine guns. And Martin Middlebrook's book is the only place I think that we really have this. There's no account of it. But in the map that Martin includes in the book, it talks about bridge house number 13. Right next to the bridge is where the Vickers MGs were until Monday night, alongside number 1 platoon. And that's
how many guns have you got in that house?
So I think there's 4.
So there's 4 guns in that house with a field of fire over the bridge.
Straight over the bridge.
Yeah, which is something.
So which makes sense from a defensive position. You've got the greatest amount of firepower with a minimum amount of men. Yeah. So you could greatest amount of direct firepower with a minimum amount of men. So I think they could go in there and they can certainly stop infantry coming across that bridge.
Yeah. I think you're going to do some damage to soft-skin vehicles as well.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And house number 14 that's behind it is where your anti-tank guns are. Yeah. Or your anti-tank battery headquarters. Yeah. Field company. They left there on Monday. So you could, and then they've got their individual guns round the bridge ramp, which are well documented. But sighting anti-tank guns and machine guns is doctrine. Anti-tanks and machine guns work today together. That's what you do because they have all the capability needed to stop infantry and tank with the minimum amount of men. Rifle companies don't have that. They have their handheld weapons, but that's it. That absolutely fits in with the tactics that we know about of locating those MMGs in that house covering the bridge approaches. Now there's another photograph that looks out that I believe is looking over the front lawn, not front lawn, but the triangle area at the front of the Hartenstein. It's the only sort of open space, I think, that really matches that description, and that's...
I'm not sure if it's to the rear of the hotel, actually. Looking down the path to the cottage. I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, maybe.
We can check that.
Yeah.
Of the location.
I think
I'm just doubtful in my mind.
Semi-disputed.
Yeah.
But it shows, the Vickers there set up on, on the tangent site. Tangent site is up. Site is really low, so probably looking at about 400 yards, maybe a little bit lower. Could be doing that with the battle site anyway. Didn't need to raise the tangent site on the Vickers for 400 yards, but the site picture is better when you have that on the tangent site there. But that's quite a great photo. I don't know whether it's the same crew that's then photographed with the guy with his mess tins in the water bottle carrier. That seems to be one of the Airlanding units that's quite well known for carrying their mess tins in their water bottle carrier.
Yeah.
Can you remember which Airlanding unit that is?
I want to say South Staffs, but
I can't
guarantee it.
So that looks Airlanding, but you can see those MMGs are getting there, and those guys are in there. Airborne helmets, quite typical. Those are really clear, and then worth saying, all of those airborne troops are wearing the Denison smock, and this is one of Pegasus Militaria's recent reproductions of the Denison, which is amazing to see.
It's incredible.
Amazing to see it as
really
a reproduction. Matt's given it some of his special treatment in aging it a little bit, fraying some of the corners. This isn't how they come off the shelf. I don't think Steve would. You need to ask him nicely for him to ruin one. So Matt's done some of that already. But it's an amazing piece of artwork almost to see that there. And just to cover off, that's probably the only differences that distinguish the airborne machine gunners from an infantry machine gunner, and we'll do some specific sort of mannequin vid of the infantry machine gunner at some point. These are the only differences. There's nothing else. We've got the Bergen here, which was used by glider pilots to carry all their stuff, and engineers, we believe, but not the general soldiers. And the other kits, very standard.
I'll just interject. That's glider pilots were given these for Operation Market Garden, not for D-Day. There's an understanding that all glider pilots were given Bergens all the way through. That's not true. That was something that came out of the Normandy invasion.
Okay.
Because they wore full webbing equipment, so lightweight respirator, everything for Normandy, and it was obviously quite difficult you couldn't fly in it, so once you'd landed you had to then find it and put it on. It's a bit of a nightmare. So then they'd realise that they could carry most of their light kit anyway in a Bergen.
So they only had to grab one thing.
So they just grabbed the Bergen for each pilot. So you find that mainly from Arnhem through to Varsity.
Varsity, okay, interesting. But it is pretty much standard kit, and one of the things sort of touch on is there's a lot of airborneisms out there, and one of those is these backpacks that I've talked about in the How to Carry Ammunition video. Although I think this one, which one's this dated? This is a 1944 dated example. There's no evidence of these being used at Market Garden. There is possibly one photo of 6th Airborne on parade for somebody, I can't remember who, wearing them, but it's really unclear as to exactly what this is, because from the front it just looks like they're wearing a small pack. So these exist, but there are no evidence whatsoever of them using those for Market Garden. Why would you, when you've got hand carts or jeeps?
Exactly.
All your liners have got handles on if you really needed to. And the other thing that raises some questions about what their tactics were and how the tactics relate to the kit, and I've talked about the tangent sight in 400 yards, is whether they actually use their dial sights and rangefinders, which are for indirect fire. They're quite sensitive bits of kit. We know they did, and these should be are there, and the guns are mounted for them. We don't think, certainly for Overlord, they weren't trained in how to use these because they didn't have time to do so. By Market Garden, I think they did, and possibly 1st Airborne, who had been using their Vickers since Tunisia, so may well have been much more familiar with them and able to do the indirect fire stuff. The supporting piece for that is in the photo that exists of the machine gun platoon commander of the South Staffs, you can see this pouch on his right hand side of his webbing, and it's for the slide rule. Now the slide rule is a complex bit of kit and mainly for indirect fire. Certainly the one he seems to be wearing is for Mark 8Z ammunition. That's the longer range ammunition. So there's some support that they have the capability to do indirect fire with them. And if I remember rightly, I've been shown some ammunition head stamps that have been taken from the White House, which was a King's Own Scottish Borderer position, that were Mark 8Z. So they had that capability to do 4,500 yards beaten zone stuff, which is probably brilliant on the drop zones and the landing zones. But once you got into the fighting, into the built-up area of Oosterbeek and Arnhem, we're talking 400 yards maximum open space down the roads. The trajectory of the Vickers is not high enough to clear buildings when you're that close to them. So the beaten zone piece probably wasn't used as much at that point, or the indirect fire piece. How they were using the guns at that is, it's not disputed, but I think there's evidence to show they had the kit with them.
But for landing zone defence, then it'd be worthwhile, wouldn't it?
Set up on one side, and you've got the whole,
which is what they were doing. Yeah. So
you've got that full range.
Yeah.
I think that probably only leaves one section of the 1st Airborne Division, which isn't the 1st Airborne Division, which is the 1st Independent Polish Parachute Brigade. Those guys that were supposed to be dropped north of the area on day 3. And actually only their anti-tank capability comes in, doesn't it, by glider?
Yeah, and everybody else is south of the river then.
Everybody else comes in south, parachuted a couple of days later. So that's 3 parachute battalions in the Independent Brigade, all of which have an MMG platoon. We know that. There's a photo that exists of that. But what also exists is a photo of Polish paratroopers, and we're not sure whether it's north of the river or south, because they exist on both sides at this point. I can only assume it's south, really, because they're playing with a Vickers machine gun, and that Vickers machine gun is actually a captured item. It's a German, well, it's doubly captured because it's a Dutch employed Vickers, so a model 1922, I think is what they were calling them, captured by the Germans and then captured by the Polish in and around Drill. So great photo of them trying to work out how to use that, and they would know exactly how to use that. They're filling it up with water. They would use that and put that straight into the field alongside their own guns, because they know how to use it.
So the weapon function is exactly the same.
Exactly the same. Yeah, and many of those are actually ex-First World War British stocks.
Oh right,
which are then
then taken into the Dutch army and then. Right.
Yeah. So absolutely everything. It is the same on that. I can't think that there's anything particular left to talk about. Okay. I will try and do something on the wider Operation Market Garden, and I'll repost some stuff that I've written before, because obviously Market's the airborne element, Garden's the ground element. We've talked about Market. We've talked about the Vickers related bit of Market. The Americans were not using Vickers in any form. But Garden, 30 Corps clearly had their divisional machine gun battalions supporting the infantry divisions. They had their independent machine gun companies supporting the armoured division. We'll do something specific on that. But this is really about the airborne element to sort of tap up Matt's knowledge of the glider usage as well. So I hope that's been enjoyable. I hope you've noticed the T-shirts that we're wearing are those that actually
resplendent.
Matt put together for us to put the designs together so that we could share those on Teespring. So go along and purchase those. Do please become a member of the Patreon site as well, where you'll get additional content, additional material, and some previews of this kind of video. And please just support the association. It's much appreciated. We can't have visitors at the moment, so this outreach is what we're doing. Hopefully that will start up again in the next few weeks if you are fancy a trip to Swindon, but we'll have to see how Visit England guidance changes for us. Hopefully we'll get that green tick good to go, all in place so people can come and see the collection again. And see, at the moment it's got a Jeep sat in the middle of it, so it keeps our spacings quite nicely.
If you're interested in the Glider Pilot Regiment or military gliders, head over to Chalk Living History on Facebook, find me there. You can contact me, message me, read through all the posts, have a look at the photographs. There's some really good stuff in there. So,
of course.
Please do that. Give us some support. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. Please remember to like and share the video and subscribe to the channel. Please support us on Patreon if you're able to, and let us know of anything you'd like to see in the future. I look forward to hearing from you.